It was another exhausting shift at the hospital. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, and the faint hum of monitors filled the air. Claire, a young nurse in her mid-20s, adjusted the blanket over one of her patients, Mr. Thompson. He was an older man, kind but weary, with deep lines etched into his face, not just from age, but from life's hardships. His smile was warm, but Claire could always see the worry in his eyes. Even when he tried to hide it, she had been caring for him for weeks now. And in that time, she had learned more about him than just his medical condition. He was alone, with no family to visit, no friends stopping by to check in. But what troubled Claire most was the way he stared at the medical bills on his bedside table, the way he folded and unfolded them, running a shaky hand over the numbers, as if trying to will them into something he could afford. Claire wasn't the type to pry, but she noticed things. The way Mr. Thompson would sigh deeply before setting the papers aside. The way he would hesitate before ordering meals from the hospital cafeteria. And the way he always declined extra services that might make his stay more comfortable. She knew that look, the silent struggle of someone too proud to ask for help, but drowning nonetheless. One evening, as she made her rounds, she found him sitting by the window, staring out at the city lights. The weight of something unsaid hung heavy in the room. "Tough night?" she asked gently. He nodded but didn't turn to face her. "Just thinking about things," he murmured. After a pause, he added with a small chuckle, "Life sure has a way of surprising you." Claire didn't press him, but something inside her twisted at the thought of this kind, lonely man fighting a battle he couldn't win. She had seen, too, many patients worry more about their bills than their own recovery. It didn't sit right with her. That night, she went home, but she couldn't shake the thought of Mr. Thompson struggling alone. She didn't have much to spare. Nurses weren't exactly rolling in money, but she had a little saved up, enough to help, at least a little. And so, with a deep breath, she made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Over the next few weeks, Claire found small, quiet ways to help. She covered parts of his bills anonymously, slipping payments through channels where they wouldn't be traced back to her. She spoke to the hospital's billing department and arranged for certain fees to be reduced where possible. She even made sure he got warm meals, sometimes paying for them herself when he hesitated to order. Mr. Thompson never knew. He only noticed that some of his financial burdens seemed to lighten just a little. Maybe, he thought, the hospital had made a mistake in their calculations. Maybe, just maybe, life was finally giving him a break. But Claire never did it for recognition. She did it because it was the right thing to do. Because she knew that sometimes people just needed a little kindness. Eventually, Mr. Thompson was discharged. He thanked Claire for her care, told her she had a kind heart, and walked out of the hospital, never knowing the full extent of what she had done for him. Years passed. Life went on. Claire continued working as a nurse. Moving up in her career, the faces of patients came and went, their stories weaving into the fabric of her life. But she never forgot Mr. Thompson. She hoped he was doing well, that he had found some peace after everything. And then one evening, as she returned home from another long shift, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, she froze. Standing there, dressed in a sharp suit, was a man she didn't recognize at first. But the moment he spoke, her breath caught in her throat. "I don't think we've met," he said, his voice steady, yet filled with emotion. "But I believe you knew my father." Claire's heart pounded. She could already tell. This wasn't just any visitor. This was someone who had come with a story of his own, and what he was about to tell her would change everything. Claire stood frozen in the doorway, her mind racing as she tried to process the man's words. His father, The realization hit her like a wave, and she felt a lump form in her throat. "Mr. Thompson," she whispered. The man nodded, his expression unreadable. He looked to be in his late 30s, tall, well-dressed, with sharp eyes that studied her closely. There was something familiar about him, not in his face, but in the way he carried himself. A quiet strength, the same kind she had seen in his father. "Can I come in?" he asked. Claire hesitated for only a second before stepping aside, motioning for him to enter. She led him to the small living room, her mind still catching up to what was happening. She hadn't thought about Mr. Thompson in a long time, at least not in the way she had when she was younger. She had helped many patients over the years, but he had been different. As they sat down, the man took a deep breath, as if trying to find the right words. "My name is Daniel Thompson," he said finally. "My father passed away last year." Claire's heart sank. She knew this was a possibility. After all, Mr. Thompson had already been an older man when she had cared for him. But hearing it still stung. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. Daniel nodded. "Thank you." He lived a lot longer than the doctors expected. And in those extra years, he made sure to tell me a story, over and over again. He paused, looking at her intently. A story about a nurse who changed his life. Claire felt her chest tighten. She had never expected Mr. Thompson to find out what she had done. She had done it in secret, hoping only that it made things a little easier for him. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes filled with something Claire couldn't quite place. Admiration, gratitude, maybe even something deeper. "He never knew your name," he said, "but he never stopped talking about you. He always said that someone, an angel in disguise, had been looking out for him when he had no one else." Claire swallowed hard. "I didn't do much," she said quickly, feeling a little overwhelmed. "Just small things." Daniel shook his head. "It wasn't small to him. My father never wanted to be a burden on anyone. He had lost everything, his job, his savings. He was drowning in medical bills, and he thought he'd never get out of it. But somehow, things got a little easier, and he never understood why. Until he passed, he believed it was just fate or a miracle." Claire looked down at her hands, feeling a mix of emotions she wasn't sure how to process. "I just wanted to help," she murmured. Daniel studied her for a moment before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the table between them. "He wanted me to find you," he said, "and he left this for you." Claire hesitated before picking up the note, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded it. The handwriting was a little shaky, but unmistakably his. "To the kind soul who saved me when I had nothing. Thank you. I never knew your name, but I will never forget you. If you ever find yourself needing kindness, I hope the world gives it back to you the way you gave it to me." Claire pressed her lips together, trying to keep her emotions in check. Daniel let the silence linger before speaking again. "There's more," he said. "My father might not have had much when he was sick, but before that, he built something. A small business, one he had to shut down when things got tough. But before he passed, he made sure it would live on." Claire looked up, confused. Daniel pulled out another envelope and placed it on the table. "He left something for you, in his will." Claire's breath caught. "What?" Daniel nodded. "It's not just money, it's something bigger. My father wanted to return the kindness he received, and he believed that if anyone deserved it, it was you." Claire stared at the envelope, her mind spinning. She had never expected anything in return. She had only wanted to do the right thing. And now, years later, the kindness she had given was coming back to her in a way she could have never imagined. Claire's hands trembled as she stared at the envelope lying on the table. A part of her wanted to push it away, to say she couldn't accept whatever was inside. She had never helped Mr. Thompson expecting anything in return. But another part of her, a quieter, more honest part, felt something deeper. Maybe this was Mr. Thompson's way of telling her that kindness should never go unanswered. Daniel watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "You should open it," he said softly. Taking a slow breath, Claire picked up the envelope and carefully tore it open. Inside was a legal document, something official looking that made her stomach tighten. Her eyes scanned the words, her pulse quickening as she tried to make sense of it. And then she saw it. Mr. Thompson had left her ownership of something, a small building. She blinked, confused, reading the details again. It was a property, his old shop, the one Daniel had mentioned. It had been closed for years, but it was still standing, waiting for someone to bring it back to life. She looked up at Daniel, completely stunned. "I don't understand. Why would he leave this to me?" Daniel smiled, but there was something emotional behind it. "Because he believed in you," he said. "Before he got sick, that shop was his whole life. He poured everything into it, and when he lost it, he thought he lost his purpose. But then you came along. You gave him something no one else did. Hope." Claire swallowed the lump in her throat. "But I'm not a business owner. I'm a nurse." Daniel nodded. "I know, and my father knew that too. That's why he wanted you to decide what happens next. The shop is yours, free and clear. You can sell it, you can rebuild it, or—" He paused, as if carefully choosing his next words. "You can turn it into something that helps people, the way you helped him." The weight of his words settled over Claire, and for the first time in a long time, she felt something shift inside her. All these years, she had dedicated herself to caring for others, to making sure no one felt alone in their struggles. And now, here was a chance to do something bigger. She could see it in her mind, turning the space into something meaningful. A community clinic, maybe. A place where people like Mr. Thompson wouldn't have to worry about their bills, where kindness wasn't just an anonymous act, but a way of life. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. "He really thought I could do this," she whispered. Daniel's expression softened. "He knew you could." For a long moment, Claire sat in silence, holding the papers in her hands. She thought about all the choices she had made that led to this moment. About the night she first saw Mr. Thompson struggling. About the quiet ways she had tried to ease his burdens. She had never imagined that one act of kindness would come full circle like this. Finally, she let out a shaky breath and nodded. "Then I won't let him down." Daniel smiled, standing up and offering his hand. "I don't think you ever could." As she shook his hand, a feeling of certainty settled in her chest. She didn't need wealth or recognition. She had never done any of it for that. But now, she had a chance to turn kindness into something lasting. And maybe, just maybe, she could be the person Mr. Thompson always believed she was. In that moment, she knew this wasn't just the end of one story. It was the beginning of something much bigger.